Okay, this is part two where we're going to solve the even numbers as opposed to the odd numbers, which we usually solve in class together. But with that said, I was reading over number one, and number one looked a little tricky. So I'm going to read through it, and I want to explain it. And I went ahead and solved it on the board so you could follow along if you have any questions. So this might help you. Number one, what is the difference when the product of 1/2 and 1/2 is subtracted from the sum of 1/2 and 1/2? Now, I don't know about you, when I was little, I struggled a lot with like word problems like these. I'd get really confused, but not to worry. We'll go through it one step at a time. So it's asking for the difference of two different problems. The first one is going to be, the first one it asks for is a multiplication problem between 1/2 and 1/2, and the next one is an addition problem, but it's important to pay attention to the way it's worded, okay? So we're taking the product and then we're subtracting it from the sum. So the first operation you have to do is your addition. You have to take 1/2 plus 1/2, and we know we put that in parentheses to remind us that we have to do those operations first. So first we would write 1/2 plus 1/2 minus 1/2 times 1/2, and then we go ahead and solve. So 1/2 plus 1/2, we remember when adding or subtracting fractions, we can only add and subtract the numerator. The denominator has to be the same. In this case it is, it's 2. So we take 1 plus 1 is 2 over 2, which equals 1. Okay, 2 over 2 is a whole. And then we take our next operation, 1/2 times 1/2. When multiplying fractions, we can multiply the numerator and the denominator. So 1 times 1 is 1, and then 2 times 2 is 4, which gives us 1 over 4. So I went ahead and did the problem. I had 1 minus 1/4, okay? Now I can't simply take away 1/4 from the 1, so I have to get rid of the 1, make it a 0, and I turn my 1 into 4 over 4 to represent the whole. Now I can do 4 over 4 minus 1 and 1/4, which gives me the final answer 3 over 4, or 3/4. Some of you may have already solved it, you didn't need any help, but for those of you that need help, that's where it is. All right, let's go on to the next one. The claws of a Siberian tiger are 10 centimeters long. That just reminded me, there's like this documentary on Netflix about tigers. I don't know if you guys have watched it. I'll probably watch it later. Anyway, the claws of a Siberian tiger are 10 centimeters long. How many millimeters long is that? Okay, so if you look at your ruler, you probably, well, maybe you have one at home, but if you look at your ruler, in between the 0 and the 1 of the centimeters, there's a bunch of tiny little lines. Those are the millimeters, and if you were to count them, there are 10 of them there. So to find out how many centimeters long, or how many millimeters long is that, I simply did 10 times 10, which gives us 100 millimeters. So the final answer for number 2 is, or should be, 100 millimeters. All right, let's go on to number 4. Number 4 is a fairly long problem, so I'm kind of glad we did the even numbers together. So number 4, make a sketch to illustrate the following statement and use the information to answer questions A through D. So the statement we're going to answer all these questions from is 4/5 of 60 lights were on. Okay, the statement is 4/5 of 60 lights were on. So I went ahead and drew my diagram. Okay, I went ahead and drew my sketch, and if you notice, it's split up into 5 different parts. Okay, now the way I determine that is from the denominator. The denominator represents the whole. Now this represents 60 lights. Okay, so to see how many or what portion of those 60 lights divided evenly, I just divided 60 by 5. Most of you already know that. It's 12. So in each of these segments, there are 12 lights. If you need to pause the video at any time, go ahead and do that, pause the video. But I want to make sure you're showing your work. I want to make sure whenever you guys come into class, you guys can show me, hey, I didn't just write the final answer, I actually did the work. So that's what you need to be doing right now. You need to make sure you have all this written down. Once you've unpaused me, we'll continue, I guess. Well, I guess I'll have to wait for you to unpause me, right? All right, so 4/5 of 60 lights were on. So the first question, letter A, into how many parts have the lights been divided? So we count it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So letter A should be 5. It's been divided into 5 equal parts. Letter B, how many lights are in each part? So let's look at one single part. There's 12, okay? So the answer to letter B is 12. How many lights are on? In our statement, it says 4/5 of the lights were on. So 4 out of the 5 are on. So 4 of these parts, we count them up, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now there's 12 in each, so we take 12 plus 12 plus 12 plus 12, or 12 times 4 is 48. So that's the answer to letter C, 48. And then last but not least, how many lights are off? So if 4/5 are on, 1/5 of the lights are off, and there's only 1, and 1 equals 12 lights for this part. So the final answer, letter D, is 12. All right, let's move on to number 6. A lot of this, again, is just review. If you don't understand any of the questions, again, feel free to comment on the videos and I can help you. But as you already know, under each of the problems, there's a little number. And that's the lesson where you can look back and reference any material. And that material will give you information about that question. So for number 6, it's a fairly easy one. 4/5 times what equals 1? If we remember from lesson 30, that's a reciprocal. We're looking for the reciprocal of 4/5, which is 5/4. Because if we take 4 times 5 equals 20, and 5 times 4 equals 20. So now we have 20/20, which makes a whole, equals 1. So that's the answer to question number 6. Question number 8. 4/6 divided by what equals 1, okay? So this is sort of along the same line as finding the reciprocal. We take 4/5 divided by 4/5 equals 1. Now, we can't divide. Remember, we can't divide fractions, but what we can do is multiply. And if you see here, we have 4/5 times, and when we multiply, we switch the sign, okay? And we multiply it by its reciprocal, which gives us, again, 20/20, which equals 1. So the final answer to number 8 is 4/5. 4/5. All right, give me 1 second. Sorry, I just had to check it if it was recording, but it is. I didn't want to give a whole lesson and then realize I wasn't recording. All right, that's number 8. Number 10, it's a 2-part question. What fraction of the rectangle is shaded? So we have this beautiful rectangle drawn out, and we count 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, 4 parts are shaded, but we need to count the whole. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16. So the entire thing represents 16, so that's my denominator. The parts that is shaded are going to represent my numerator. I don't know if you can see me over there. Numerator, 4, okay? So now we have 4/16. We reduce that. We see that 4 goes evenly into both of these numbers. 4 goes into 4 one time evenly, and 4 goes into 16 4 times evenly to give us 1/4. So letter A for number 10, the final answer is 1/4. And now we need to change 1/4 into a decimal, very simply. We make the numerator, number 1, we make that our dividend. We make the denominator our divisor. Okay, so we take 1 divided by 4. Okay, 4 does not go into 1. So we write a 0 and we place our decimal above the decimal place. So that's going to be the decimal in our quotient. And then we see, does 4 go into 10? It does, 2 times. So 4 times 2 is 8. We subtract that. 10 minus 8 is 2. Bring down the 0. And then we see how many times does 4 go into 20? It goes into it 5 times. So 5 times 4 is 20. We write that down. And now we have 0 as our remainder. And our final answer is 0.25 for number 10B. All right, let's go on to number 12. We're going to do a little bit of the same thing we did here. We're going to compare 3/5 and 0.35. Okay, so we've got 3/5 and we're comparing it to 0.35. Now, one's a fraction and one's a decimal. We could either change the decimal into a fraction or the fraction into a decimal. In this case, I changed the fraction into a decimal simply by doing what we did there. We made the numerator into the dividend, the denominator into the divisor. So all we did is we're dividing 3 by 5, okay? So 3 divided by 5, 5 doesn't go into 3, so we write our 0, okay? And then we see how many times does 5 go into 30, all right? But before we do that, I don't think you can see it there, it kind of got erased. Make sure you write your decimal. Make sure you don't continue writing until you have your decimal. Okay, so 5 goes into 36 times evenly. 6 times 5 is 30. We go ahead and subtract that. That gives us 0. We bring down the 0, okay? And then we see 5 doesn't go into 0, so we write our 0. Now, this is just holding our 100th place value because this decimal goes to the 100th place value. In most cases, we wouldn't even write the 0. The problem would be over right there, okay? It'd be 0.6. But because we have a decimal in the 100th place, I went ahead and added that 0. So now we can compare the two. Which one's bigger? 0.60 or 0.35? And the obvious answer is 0.60. So that's the answer to number 12. Make sure your alligator is eating the 3/5. And then, okay, we're at our last one. So we have 3/4 equals what over 100? So what do I need to multiply 4 by to get 100? Okay, oh, I did that wrong. That's right. All right, 4 times, I had 20, but it's 25. 4 times 25 equals 100, okay? So whatever I did to my denominator, I'm gonna do to my numerator as well. So 3 times 25 equals, think of quarters, 3/4 equals 75 cents. So your final answer to problem number 14 is 75. Once you complete this, make sure you do all the work in your odd numbers, or solve all the problems for the odd numbers, and then go ahead and make sure you answer all the questions inside the quiz. All right, great job, guys.